Straight to our top story and the big focus on profit this week. That's fourth quarter GDP, of course, that came in at a mere 5.3%, the lowest in nearly 9 years, led largely by poor performance in the manufacturing and farm sectors. GDP for FY12 as well was revised down to 6.5%. So what seems to be dragging the economy down and what could be the policy implications going forward? Ira Dugal breaks it down for us.
Disappointing, dismal, downright depressing. Those are some of the words that were being used to describe the quarter four GDP numbers. And actually, honestly speaking, it was probably all of that. Let's get to the data and then we'll talk about the analysis behind it. What you got was 5.3% growth in the fourth quarter. That's the lowest in 9 years, according to the CSO, although there's been a change in series in the middle of those 9 years. But nevertheless, it's a terrible number and it's much below the 6.1% which the markets were expecting. Also, that's brought down your FY12 GDP growth to 6.5% compared to the CSO's estimate, which stood at 6.9%. If you look at the breakup, let's go through the fourth quarter breakup first. The farm sector was a bit of a disappointment. We were hoping that despite a strong base effect, you'd get about a 2.5 to 3% number, but 1.7 weighed down on the headline. The services number was actually the most disappointing, according to me, because services is the one part of the economy which has been holding up, but services growth coming down to 7.9% in the fourth quarter tells you that the industrial slowdown is now perhaps going into the broader economy. Services in particular. Industry we knew was weak. 1.9% was the tally for the fourth quarter, and manufacturing at negative 0.3. Again, very, very disappointing, and you're not seeing any signs of pickup in manufacturing. There is a high base effect there as well, but even with that base effect, negative 0.3 is disappointing. For the full year, this is what the tally looks like. 2.8% growth on the farm sector, 8.9% growth on the services sector. Industrial and manufacturing 3.4 and 2.5% respectively is the growth number there. Remember, the GDP release has an expenditure side to it as well. That data is not always reliable, and this time again it's thrown up some slightly confusing, conflicting triggers, because while the sectoral indices are telling you one story, the expenditure data is not that bad actually. So the private consumption side has held up nicely in the fourth quarter with 6.1%. It's moderating, but it's not falling off a cliff. So you know that's the way it should be. Government consumption at 5.1% is also going along expected lines. What was a surprise was the fixed capital formation number, and this was a positive surprise because this saw a growth of 3.6%, which meant that even for the full year, you'd seen plus 5% growth on capital formation, which is an indicator of investment. Q2, Q3, we'd seen negative numbers. Q4 seems to have seen a turnaround. Has something changed? Are public infrastructure projects starting to pick up, or is this just an aberration? We'll wait and see. What is the government's perspective? The finance minister read out a prepared statement saying that he thinks the negative factors have bottomed out. He also said that some measures that they have taken, including on the power, on the coal side, should help growth recover a little bit, and they also said that from here on their focus is to address the fiscal and the current account imbalances. The Prime Minister's Economic Advisory Council Chief Dr. Rangarajan was a little bit more honest in his assessment of the economy, saying that for FY13 you'll probably see growth between 6.5% and 7% and not the 7.6% that the government has budgeted. He also ruled out any room for fiscal stimulus. He said the best you can do is push infrastructure projects, you can implement the budget, and of course yes, the monetary policy can bring down rates a little bit, but he said that inflation remains a concern as well. So what next? Where does this leave us? Well, you know, the next sort of milestone is going to be June 18th when the Reserve Bank of India has its mid-quarter policy. The probability of a rate cut has definitely risen. You can't say a rate cut is off the table. In fact, it's probably likely. All I would say is that the unknown still remains in terms of government action. So if you get rate cuts but don't get government action, I'm not sure you can reverse this load.
I think this is the lowest in the contemporary period. It has been substantially because of the very poor performance of the manufacturing sector. Agricultural growth has been little more than 2%.
It's quite clear that the slowdown is both disappointing, and we do need to look at what are the I mean, you can clearly see from the quarterly numbers that the deceleration is continuing. It is true that the last quarter of the preceding year was a high growth rate, so there may be some base effect. But basically the slowdown is there. We have to do something about it.
As far as the government is concerned, any further fiscal stimulus of the type that we did in 2008 is not possible. Already our fiscal deficits are very high, and therefore, in my view, government acting in a manner in which the fiscal deficit during the current year will be maintained at the budgeted level itself will increase its credibility and will act as a stimulant for private investment. A government not borrowing beyond what has been budgeted would provide greater space for the private sector to borrow, and that will be a good thing.
The most important measure is, as I mentioned, the goods and services tax. Among the things the government could do themselves is to cut the subsidies, make announcements of foreign direct investments in some of the sectors. Things can improve dramatically, but action is required, not just talk.
So let's keep it with the focus this week and understand just how dire the situation is and get a sense of the sentiment within the corporate community.